Yay!
Setting up your meeting for YouTube Live.
It says that we are live on my end. So, in case anybody can hear me, hello, Mercuranians.
Okay. I think it's working.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
It
there's a
says that we are
delay
live
in the
on my
audio.
end. Oh, there is
Oh,
a bad echo.
me
Like
too.
I'm listening to me
Oh,
talk from
just
like
mute it on the page. That fixed it for me.
muted on what page?
Oh,
I
well,
only,
do you hear it anymore?
hello?
Hi, can you hear that?
No, now I
Okay,
don't.
that was
Okay,
on
was
my
it
end.
the
I fixed it. All right.
Okay, cool. Okay, woohoo! After a
We're live.
long troubleshooting
After a long
session.
troubleshooting and a long winter of
Yes.
retrogrades, we're finally back.
Yeah, we have missed doing this so much. We have been very, very busy with other things and unfortunately have not been able to prioritize the Mercs, but we are so happy to be back in business. We cannot wait.
Yeah, I know. It's been like it was tough because we talked about it in October. We were like doing this project and it just wasn't ready until now. So the time's finally here. And today we're gonna sort of introduce it and just get our feet in the water with this longer reading project, which is gonna be exciting. And yeah, it's also our first time going live. So this is gonna be cool for anyone listening now or later if you're tuning in after we've um finished the stream. Yeah, thanks for being a part of our first attempt at a live stream on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. I have never done this before. I was like an old person when Cam was explaining it to me. Like, are you sure that you can go live on YouTube?
Yeah. Well, it was still my first attempt at this, so I'm glad it's finally here. Because I was a little stressed for a minute, but we're good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're reading Rhetorius. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I know Stella, do you want to talk a little bit about like um just the AFA and like how we're making this happen and all of that?
Yeah, definitely. So we reached out to the AFA a little while ago because we needed a copyright permission. They are the ones who have published this book. If you are interested in getting a hard copy, it can be purchased in person, online, Amazon, anywhere. Pretty much you can buy this. They are the publishers. So we got in touch with them, asked them if we would be able to do a series on that, and lo and behold, here we are. This is something very exciting. Rhetorius was one of the latest Hellenistic authors, so he is quite thorough and quite complete. Whereas when you go further back into the tradition, there isn't as much continuity as we have later in the tradition. What made Rhetorius super unique was that he was the first astrologer to publish like a thorough, complete compendium step by step on how to detail a nativity, how to read a birth chart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really exciting things I think about Rhetorius's text. Like I guess maybe to preface it a preface literally, what we're gonna read. In James, so James Holden translated this compendium from the Greek manuscripts, um, from the CCAG, which is like the big catalog compendium of all the ancient Greek texts that remained in manuscript form. And he did that in like the 80s and sort of slowly re-edited and published his own translations. And the AFA kind of published this whole volume a little bit later. And this is, I think, the fourth edition that we have now. But basically, if you have the book, or if you want to also look on Google Books as well, there is a decent amount of the book that's available to the public for free, all of which we'll be reading from for today and for some of the first episodes. So if you want to go look there as well, you can follow along. Um, but yeah, I mean, pretty early on, Holden's just talking about like how literally Rhetorius, like that word, it's like not really super like a name, like it just means orator. So we really don't know anything about this figure. He says he's like Rhetorius is a very shadowy figure, and that's very true in the first sentence. And I mean, even now, like, still, do you want to talk a bit about like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
development with, yeah.
Yeah, so Rhetorius being this kind of elusive like person that we don't really know for sure about led Levant Laszlo in his studies to argue that Rhetorius is actually an astrologer for the Emperor Zeno. And this astrologer is anonymous. We don't have a name, just like we don't have a true name for Rhetorius. But he argues that that this compendium was actually produced by Zeno's astrologer, and a little bit later than Holden thought. If you are interested in reading about that as well, Levant Laszlo is working through the Heroi project. And so if you want, just Google Laszlo, Heroi, Rhetorius, the Egyptian, and you can read all about that.
Mhm. Yeah, so as we have it like now in Holden's text, there are around 117 chapters, and this is pretty significant because, like you said, still like most of the extant authors and texts are considerably smaller, or just even if they were complete, like they just wrote smaller introductions to astrology. But this is really cool because Rhetorius references a lot of other authors in the tradition. I mean, he cites the Egyptians, Phinehas the Egyptian, Dorotheus, Ptolemy, Valens, Antigonus, even Firmicus Maternus and Paul. But primarily, the big thing with Rhetorius's text is that most of the entire compendium, at least like the first 50 chapters or more, or roughly, pretty much are almost exact replicas of Antiochus's text, The Treasury, which was a large introduction to astrology with a bunch of definitions, and like just initial basic explications that Porphyry also kind of recompiled, sprinkled in his own details when he wrote an introduction to Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos. So Porphyry wrote his own compendium, which was basically just Antiochus, to introduce Ptolemy's text. And then between both of those, Antiochus and Porphyry, Rhetorius sort of may have had access to both, and then once again put his own stuff in the middle of it, and a lot of his own stuff. There's a good amount of stuff that is original, but that is sort of what this is. As we have these pages today, that's kind of what we're reading.
Yeah. In the very back of the book, if you have the paper copy, it does give you a side-by-side comparison. You can see that these chapters have similar information, but towards the end, you can see around the 60s, it starts to differ. And
Mhm.
Rhetorius has more chapters than Antiochus and did write some different information.
Mhm.
Um, we are not here in the book yet, but I actually, if my memory serves me well, didn't Rhetorius transcribe that Saturn was a feminine planet? I could be mistaken. I feel like he was one of them who did
I
that.
know Dorotheus did. I'm not sure off the top of my head, actually. The thing is, he doesn't
Will
say a lot about the planets, and that's where Holden made another reference to the fact that there is this extant additional, where is it, in appendix, he says, so this is page 10 of the preface. Some additional material is attributed to Rhetorius in the manuscripts, most notably the chapters on the natures of the 12 signs in the 7 planets, which are said to be from Toiker of Babylon. These chapters do not appear to have been a part of the main compendium, although they would fit in well because its treatments of the signs and planets is rather skimpy. Right, so he doesn't talk about them a lot, but there was maybe this inclusion of this other appendix from Toiker on the planets and the natures of the signs.
I mean, the references that we have of Saturn being feminine are very like offhanded.
Hmm.
I don't, I mean, I'm going based off of that one astrology podcast episode. I think it's like 84 or 86 or something about Saturn being feminine,
Mm,
and the different traditional authors who said that. But it's a
yeah.
pretty like offhanded comment that
Mhm.
Saturn is a feminine planet. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
come back to that.
yeah.
So yeah, and then I guess for dating Rhetorius, there are some, and so this is page 9 on that preface. There are some written positions of the planets that, or star positions rather, that look like they are going to around 504 AD. And then in a later chapter, there is a some more examples that Pingree, who was another translator and compiler of the Greek manuscripts, Pingree worked with these manuscripts and said that he thought it was around 100 years later, around 601 AD. Um, but this was sort of potentially an error or miscalculation on his part. And so this Rhetorius person, whoever it was, looks like it was more around 500 AD, so early 6th century, which again is very late for the Hellenistic period, the very end of it, before it kind of handed over to the Islamic period.
Yeah, definitely. And those same manuscripts that Pingree is talking about and Holden here, these are also the manuscripts that I'm sorry, Laszlo discusses and addresses on his perspective.
Yeah.
So that's worth mentioning as well.
Yeah. And I think, he at the end of that preface in like part 2, he lists like the 6 or so manuscripts that are mainly constituting the translation he has put together here. Um, which yeah, and once again, he just says reference the CCAG. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much, I guess, all the prefacey stuff that we wanted to like note. Is there anything else you want to mention before we just start reading the Rhetorius' preface?
Um, Nothing much to Holden's preface. I will say thank you so much to Holden. May you rest in peace. This is a blessing. Thank you for translating this and providing us with this ancient wisdom.
Yeah, I feel like Holden is like a really unsung hero for the like our generation's modern traditional like group, like because everyone talks about like Schmidt, who just came sort of just after, sort of contemporaneous to Holden, like in the 90s. But Holden was really, he was translating Paul and a bunch of medieval authors, and yeah, I mean Rhetorius and Porphyry, like starting in the 80s, he published that paper on whole sign houses. So Holden was a really like foundational and monumental figure for the translations
Yeah,
that we have. So yeah, it's
yeah, definitely
definitely.
a pioneer in that area for sure, especially being an astrologer with astrological knowledge. Like we had Pingree, but
Mhm.
Pingree was not an astrologer. Pingree was an academic.
Mhm.
And so Holden reevaluating some of the things that Pingree said and providing that astrological context, like made some of this literature so much more decipherable to astrologers and academics alike.
Mhm.
So kudos to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
Uh,
we can get started. Are we good?
yeah, let's dive in. Um, are you thinking every other paragraph or
Yeah, that's
just,
good.
yeah? Okay. I'll let you take the wheel.
Okay, so we're starting with the preface of Rhetorius's explanation and narration on the whole art of astrology, which is sort of like the full name the manuscripts give it. On what account, the 12 signs being circular, have we made the beginning from Aries and not rather from Cancer, since it's the ascendant of the world, or from Leo, because it's the solar sign, but rather than either of those of the two luminaries, the house of Mars, Aries, has been preferred. We say then that since the ancients made the 12 signs bodily according to the parts of man, making the beginning from Aries, affirming it to be the head, Taurus the throat, and so on down to the feet, on account of this, from the more ruling part of the commander, the brain, and all that which is proper to the head, they have made the beginning from Aries. So yeah, I mean, he mentioned earlier, like, why not Cancer or Leo? Because like the ascendant of the Thema Mundi, which is like that kind of instructional diagram, is Cancer rising, and of course the sun rules Leo's. Like, but he says here Aries rules the head in the spring, of course. So, and now he will explain the spring, the season. So if you want to,
Yeah, and so he goes from that into this next paragraph saying, and in particular, they have made the seasons in agreement with the tropics, taking the beginning from the vernal sign, an example, from Aries, for spring signifies the suckling, summer the youth, fall, middle age, and winter old age. Four of these signs, then, are called tropical, and four solid, and four bicorporeal. And the tropical signs are so called because when the sun is in them, the changes of the air are altered. For example, when it is in Aries, a tropical sign, it brings the vernal and equinoctial change, and thenceforth the air becomes more serene. The day grows longer from the equal hours. When it is in Taurus, a solid and vernal sign, it makes the air calmer and unalterable, and it increases the day further. When it is in Gemini, a bicorporeal sign, it equalizes the air and makes the blending together of it between spring and summer, and increases the day further. In this quadrant, then, it is completed spring, which is air. So, what he's doing here is just introducing. He says that the year is split into four segments: spring, summer, fall, winter. And then he says that within spring, we start with the tropical signs, also known as the cardinal signs. At the beginning of each season, he lists that those are tropical, and then for solid, for fixed, and then bicorporeal for mutable. And then that's followed with just a quick little step by step on spring, and then into Aries season, into Taurus season, and then Gemini season, covering how the weather plays a key role in the zodiac that we're going to be using. So outlines that we're using a tropical zodiac.
yeah. So yeah, he continues on to explain summer, which are the following three signs, and he says, again, when the sun is in Cancer, a tropical sign, it brings the summer tropic, which there's a footnote that just says it's the summer solstice. And the air begins to become hotter, and from then it takes away from the magnitude of day and adds to the magnitude of night. Again, when it's in Leo, a solid and summer sign, it makes the air steadier and unalterable, taking away from the magnitude of day and adding to the magnitude of night. Again, when it's in Virgo, a bicorporeal sign, it equalizes the air and makes the blending together of it between summer and fall, and it increases the night further and decreases the day. In this quadrant, then, it's completed summer, which is fire. And so basically, again, we're going through each of the seasons with summer here in three parts. The only difference from spring is now that after we hit the summer solstice, the peak of the hours of daylight, it decreases. So even though it is getting hotter, generally the temperature has increased a lot in summer, the nights actually are starting to grow after the sun ingresses into Cancer. So we just get that cardinal ingress with Cancer, the fixed season of Leo in the middle, and then the mutable or double-bodied sign of Virgo, which is that fading from last season into the next.
Yeah, and then continuing with fall. Again, when the sun is in Libra, a tropical sign, it brings the autumnal and equinoctial tropic, and from then the air turns colder and the night grows longer from the equal hours. Again, when it is in Scorpio, a solid sign, it makes the air of fall calmer and unalterable, taking away the magnitude of the day and adding to the magnitude of the night. Again, when it is in Sagittarius, a bicorporeal sign, it equalizes the air and makes the blending together of it between fall and winter, and it takes away further from the magnitude of the day and adds to the magnitude of the night. In this quadrant, then, it is completed fall, which is Earth.
Yeah. I guess it's just interesting to me how he's using the same words with each season. So the solid sign makes the air calmer and unalterable, is what he's saying for all of them. Like, it's that fixed nature that stabilizes weather, that just makes things sort of residing into like a stability. But then with like the last sign of the season, the mutable sign, he's saying that it equalizes the air and it balances it and it makes a further blending of it. And like that just makes sense. The mutable nature of one thing is to have two qualities and to balance and kind of go back and forth between them. And that's literally what we see when it's that time of the
Right.
year every year.
Yeah, that duality is such a key part of mutable signs, and that's usually taken out of the context of weather in the modern world. You know, we typically don't assign the different modalities because of the weather, but we see here very clearly that that was Rhetorius. That was the tradition, was that the signs are assigned, the modalities are the way they are because of the weather.
Mhm.
And also, I will say, I was going to save this thought until we were done with winter, but I can't.
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating how he assigns different seasons, different elements. So he says spring is air, right? Yeah, spring is
Mhm.
air. Summer is fire. Fall is earth. And then winter is water. I think that I've heard otherwise from other authors, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting attribution. I don't like know if there's really one way to do it. Um, I guess like this analogy makes sense because spring and summer have air and fire, which are the active elements, and like day is longer than night. So there's like the more of the active impulse than the fall and winter seasons have with earth and water, which are the feminine elements. So that makes sense. But I mean, once again, you could argue so many different combinations of them. But
Right.
yeah, he gives these ones, so there's that. Um,
Yeah.
And so last, just for winter, when the sun's in Capricorn, a tropical sign, it makes the winter tropic or winter solstice. And from then, the air turns more wintry and the day begins to increase and night to abate. Again, when it's in Aquarius, solid and wintry sign, it makes the air of winter calmer and unalterable, taking away from the magnitude of night and adding it to the magnitude of daytime. Again, when it's in Pisces, a bicorporeal sign, it equalizes the air and makes the blending together of it between winter and spring, taking away from the magnitude of night and adding it to the magnitude of day up to the equinoctial hours. In this quadrant is completed the wintry air, which is water. And that's this preface into his entire compendium.
Yeah. So I think it's a very fascinating preface, you know, just like straight to the point. This is the Zodiac. Why does it start at this point?
Mhm.
There isn't any kind of philosophical like treatise of astrology.
Mhm.
During that time period, determinism was the most widely accepted school of thought. I mean, it was kind of fettering by 500 CE, but you get what I'm saying. And I think it's kind of funny that he just like takes that for granted, you know, that like everybody knows like what astrology is, like how it, the fact that we're using the planets and a having influence from the constellations within the sun's ecliptic. Like there's no broader, I don't know, there's no
Mhm.
context to the practice.
Yeah. Like a lot of texts do, like what we have from Firmicus, who is another author that we do have a lot from. Like the first couple chapters and books are all just about defending astrologers, um, talking about like how astrologers should be, and like, why. But yeah, he's just like, hey, these are the seasons, and then now he kind of moves on to just talk more about the signs and whatnot. So should we start
Yeah.
with chapter one?
Hmm. Yeah. So then, chapter one, this is page 3, by the way. Masculine and feminine signs and houses and stars that become masculine and feminine. Before I read this, I will say, keep in mind this was written a long time ago. So if something bothers you in here, it shouldn't. But yeah, there are 6 masculine signs: Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius, and 6 feminine: Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Pisces. The houses from the MC to the ASC are masculine. Those from the ASC to the IMC are feminine. Again, those houses from the IMC to the DSC are masculine, and those from the DSC to the MC are feminine. Of these four quadrants, then, two become masculine and two feminine. Again, the masculine stars are the Sun, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury. The feminine are the Moon and Venus, but these stars sometimes become masculine and sometimes feminine. And these stars become masculine if they are with the Sun in their morning rising, for example, posited in the signs going before the Sun within 15 degrees. But they become feminine whenever being vespertine. They are positive whenever being vespertine, they are posited within the sun within 15 degrees.
Yeah, there's a lot here.
There's a lot here. So let's go back to that little bit about feminine and masculine house quadrants,
Yeah.
because that's lots of words.
Mhm.
So from the ascendant to the midheaven.
Mhm.
So that's houses 12, 11, and 10, if we're using a whole sign chart. And then from the midheaven to the descendant, though, that is feminine.
Mhm.
Yes. So that first segment rising is feminine. Then once it goes past the midheaven and starts to set, that quadrant is feminine. And then after it sets and it's moving back towards the IC, that quadrant is masculine. And then from the IC to the ascendant, that quadrant is feminine. So if you picture it in your mind, you can break the chart into four. That left angle from like the going across this way is going to be the masculine X side, and then the feminine is the other X. I don't know if that image transferred through language, but yeah.
Yeah, I think of it like, whatever is moving something the highest up or like the lowest down is like the most like masculine, right? So like the most active expression is like bring it to the highest, bring it down to the lowest, and then when it retreats from that, visibility being high or low, that's when it's like feminized or becomes more passive. So, like you said, setting after hitting the midheaven or actually rising up after hitting the IC to the ascendant would be the feminine quadrants. And then he references the stars, and so he does say here he does include Saturn with the masculine stars.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Um, but yeah, we're basically looking at once again just kind of a classic way of attributing gender to the stars. I would say, except that he's including Mercury as masculine and not stating that it's neutral. That's a little bit more unconventional in some cases. But I'd say usually Mercury is said to be neutral. Um, and then he even adds after that they still inherently may alter to be more masculinized or feminized after
Mm-hmm.
that. And we'll talk more about those sect conditions that change that. He'll talk more about that.
Yeah. So positive in the signs going before the sun within 15 degrees and um being vespertine, meaning rises after the sun within 15 degrees. So if it's masculine, it's masculinized, if it's morning star, it's feminized, if it's evening star, if this just means that it rises before or after the sun, there will be more attention given to this in the
Yeah.
future.
And we did an episode on those sect rejoicing conditions. So if you want to check out, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5, we explain morning star, evening star, all of those gender,
Right.
energy altering conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, next paragraph or anything else on that one? Okay. Again, the stars become masculine when they're posited in masculine signs and are northern, but they become feminine when they're in feminine or southern signs. So I kind of want to stop there. Um, just because I know that I have some notes in here from when we were first reading this about what we thought that meant. So of course, a masculine sign would be in an air or fire sign. He lists those at the beginning of chapter 1. But then he says, and are northern. And then after that become feminine and feminine signs or southern signs. So this is maybe a little bit ambiguous in Holden's part. So I would maybe be curious to look at the Greek here to see exactly how it's worded. Because before it sounds like masculine signs and northern, those sounds like two different conditions. But here with the feminine, he says they're in feminine or southern signs. And then it sounds like those are like the same thing. Do you get what I'm saying by that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, is masculine like equivalent with northern, or are they two separate conditions
Right.
that can make something more masculine?
Right. Because northern to me either could be referring to latitude,
Yeah,
just the
that
note
was
we
my
made
first
here,
thought.
which
Yeah.
would be appearing visibly higher than the sun's ecliptic, having like northern latitude over the sun's ecliptic. Or it makes me think of northern signs because after that he says southern signs. And when I think of that, northern signs, like we said, are spring and summer, which, he said air and fire, right? Active versus southern signs, the winter and fall when there's less light. So once again, ambiguity, he may be talking about like, the little latitude or the half of the year, which could be another, impetus on, so that is to say Aries, Gemini, and Leo are more masculine signs than are Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius, which are the masculine signs of the southern signs, of the winter fall signs. So that could also maybe be what he's saying here.
That north and south distinction does make sense as well, because
Mhm.
when you're in the southern hemisphere, the southern signs become would then be more masculine,
Mhm.
right, than
Yeah,
the northern signs. So that makes sense with that language. But it is kind of ambiguous. So
yeah. And then he says again, talking about the quadrants, they're going to be more masculinized in those quadrants or feminized in those quadrants, which we talked about. Um, the stars which become masculine in the masculine signs or the masculine quadrants, contribute to masculine genitures or natal charts, for they make willful, bold persons having manliness in themselves. But they make women undignified, shameless, bold, unruly, and in sexual relations taking a masculine role, or even being tree beds. Um, so he's basically saying some pretty controversial stuff here about the biological gender of the person and how that matches with the sect conditions or these gender conditions in their chart. And that's something we did mention at the end of our sect rejoicing episode was like, regarding however, you affirm your own gender identity, the sects and phases and signs and expressions by sect of all your planets could contribute in a way to how you actively or passively express your gender identity.
yeah, I agree with that 100%. I've also heard the argument that using language like masculine and feminine imposes the binary onto astrology. While I do see how somebody could feel that way, I in this excerpt alone, Rhetorius emphasizes the fact that this is a gradient and that it can be
Yep.
more masculine. It can be a feminine planet that is masculinized.
Mhm.
So there is definite, as somebody who is binary deviant, I really don't see like the clear gender binary coming out of this. So don't cancel Rhetorius.
Yeah. And it's like, if anything, he's saying here, like, yeah, it's all right to use terms that are binary because we do that to add nuance to the delineation because it's nuanced as AF. Like, there's so many
Yeah.
factors to consider. And he's saying that here for men who have more
Hmm.
masculinized planets acts like this. And his
Yeah.
choice of language on whatever half, whatever. But the idea is just that that's getting altered even for women who may act or present more, right? All these terms,
Yeah.
whatever. But
And
that's, yeah.
like, yeah. And like the sexual example, like just think about society back then and like a woman who was eager to have sex, like that could be a slippery slope. So that could put her safety and well being at risk, even. So keep that in mind that that might be why he used that example.
Yeah. So
And
he's
then,
going to go on further with that. Do you want to read what he says in the
oh,
next paragraph?
yeah. Is this gonna be our last chapter for
Yeah,
today?
I think so.
Okay. Alrighty. So last chapter or last paragraph. But when the stars become feminine from phases and signs and quadrants, they make men soft, faint hearted, cowardly, afraid of everything, effeminate, and generally castrated or doing women's work. And the women with downcast eyes, bashful, prudent, solemn, subject to men, and those who were taught womanly ways. As we have said, these things about the morning and evening risings of the stars, for the settings and retrogrades of the stars are inactive and weaker and uneven in their action, except stars that are in the heart, meaning Cazimi. And the stars that are in the heart are said to be those that are conjoined partily to the sun, either in the same degree or an adjacent degree. None of the ancients have made mention of this phase, but since we have found it by experiment, we have added it to the list because even Ptolemy spoke of conjunction as a phase but didn't mention its force. So, Holden has a handful of footnotes on this bit, but I think that like the most important thing to get from this is that he says that setting in retrograde phase, so setting meaning under the beams, right?
Mm.
Um, and retrograde, so moving against typical secondary motion. That is a weakening state of the planet, except for stars that are in the heart of the sun. So a star that is Cazimi, he says that even if it's retrograde, that is not going to be a major affliction of it. Being in the heart of the sun is what he thinks is something that is, I don't want to say bonifying, but strengthening the
Yeah.
planet. And then either in the same degree or an adjacent degree.
Mm.
So this is a hot
No
topic.
ambiguity.
Yeah, do you want to like mention that, or because I know that
Yeah,
there's some strong opinions on Kazemi.
right. Well, the main definition that we can take from this is 1 degree. That's the idea. Um, Adjacent degree is most likely just referring to the fact that, yeah, say the sun is at 12 and a half, that 1 degree range really is 11 and a half to 13 and a half. So that adjacent degree might fall within orb. Their orbs might be within 1 degree. But it might be a different numerical degree. So that's the main idea. Later on, later medieval authors found that it should be way reduced to like just about 16 arc minutes, or 17 arc minutes, which is a lot less than 1 degree, less than a third. So opinions
Um,
changed over time.
yeah, that puts the planet like in the sun's like semi-diameter. That's what the
Mm,
footnote says here.
right.
But I think it is worth mentioning that the sun takes up 30 arc minutes of
Mm,
space in the sky.
right.
So if we're go I feel like Kazemi, if we're going to, my personal opinion, if we're going to be as strict as we can on what we constitute as a Kazemi, it's going to be that 30 arc minute while it's physically within the sun's
Like
diameter.
that disc, like literally if you
Yeah.
look at the sun, like that's that measurement. So that
Hmm.
makes sense because we measure so many things astronomically, like that's very conceptually solid way to do it. And I agree. um
Yeah.
but it's interesting too, he says, because none of the ancients made reference of it. He's one of the latest authors from the Hellenistic period that's talking about it. And he said he mentioned that Ptolemy spoke of the conjunction with the sun as a part of like a planet's synodic phase cycle with the sun, but he didn't mention its force. So he didn't necessarily acknowledge what power that gives a star being Cazimi or in the heart of the sun. But Rhetorius says here, um, where does he say that? None
None
of the
of the
ancients have made mention,
ancients.
yes, have made mention of the phase, but since we have found it by experiment, we have added it to the list. So he's saying like, hey, we're adding some new things. And that's the beauty of all these transmissions and right recopyings. It's like we're always evolving and enhancing that. So that's a little piece of what he's adding here, which is cool.
Yeah, and I think that that's something so great about Rhetorius and kind of like why we settled with him as
Mm,
our author of choice, because like
yep.
we see here that at the end of the Hellenistic tradition, Kazemi was just being introduced. And like those are people who have access to that kind of experimentation or text or astrologers who can testify to that. And
Mhm.
I maybe I'm just a nerd, but I think it's like so fascinating. Like imagine being an ancient astrologer and being like, oh, you can't see Mercury. Normally he's combust, but the last three people I've met with Mercury Kazemi have been great mercurial figures, or there
Right,
was a great literary work published on a Mercury Kazemi. Maybe
right.
this is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's cool because Rhetorius is definitely a bridge in between the Hellenistic and medieval authors, and we'll see that come up over and over again, even later on when we talk about house division, how, like a medieval that later became a scribe medieval Alcovich's system is really exposed in Rhetorius here. So he was an important link, whoever the heck he was. But yeah, so that was pretty much it that we wanted to talk about for our first episode. Um,
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Next week, or yeah, next episode, we'll call them
Mhm.
episodes. We'll pick back up where we left off. There will be a little bit more reading time next episode,
Yeah.
but we wanted to just say hi, welcome
Mhm.
back, and introduce everybody to the text and give you guys time to order it if you want,
Yeah. Mhm.
because it would be great if you followed along with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. Happy
All right. Well,
Mercury
thank you.
Day.
Yeah, Mercuranians out. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see
Yeah.
you at the next one.